This is Jay Sherer from How Stories Work. In my last video about Iron Man's story structure and its narrative arc and applying Sid Field's paradigm to Iron Man's narrative arc, I mentioned or referenced the differences between the Iron Man script and what we actually see in the finished film. And today I'm going to talk through some of those because some of them are very fascinating. And some of them are more generalized and some of them are a little bit more specific. So I'll get into each one of those. I have the script up right here. I have just watched the film. And so I've got all of these things in my head that we can talk about now. The first thing I want to bring up is that Iron Man in the script, in the beginning of the film, definitely feels like a less likable person than Iron Man in the film. So the script, he seems a lot less likable. In other words, his character arc might feel a little bit more drastic. One of the reasons we like Tony so much in the film is because Robert Downey Jr. plays the character so likable. So even when he's doing things that we would probably all agree are not necessarily the best things that a superhero should be doing, we still like it because Robert Downey Jr. is treating it pretty fun, and he seems like a fun guy. Now, he's doing some things that we would all agree he probably shouldn't be doing, but he does it in such a way that we sort of forgive him for some of those things. In the script, it's not as clear that it's supposed to be all in good fun. It does seem like Tony's actually more annoying, and the relationship between Tony and Rhodey is slightly more conflict oriented. There's more conflict between them. Yes, it's still kind of fun, but there does seem to be a little bit more annoyance on Rhodey's part and a little bit more flamboyantly annoying things that Tony's actually doing. So that's one difference in the script. Another difference in the script is, and they didn't really, I don't really know which one they wanted to use, but they spell arc reactor in two different ways. So sometimes it's spelled ARC and sometimes it's spelled ARK. I've always thought that it was ARC. If you look it up on the wikis for Marvel wikis, it's always spelled ARC. But apparently in the script, sometimes it was called ARK as well, in terms and referencing the arc reactor. One of the biggest things, well, two of the biggest things really, that I think are different about the script and the film, but are way better in the film. The film improved on the script. And that happens a lot of times because when they film the movie, they go, you know what, we could film this a little bit differently. We could film this scene a little bit differently. Or they have you've heard a lot about, especially with Star Wars, you'll hear about like shoots that happen later on. After the initial filming is done, they have reshoots. Well, in those reshoots, you can actually add scenes or subtract scenes from the film to make the film more compelling. And so I think some of that was done here in Iron Man. So one of the things that we saw initially was that we saw that Tony, when he was testing the Mark II suit, this is the midpoint of the film. If you watch the structure video, you would know that. He's in the middle of the film. He's testing the Mark II body armor, the Mark II suit, and he takes it all the way up into the air, and it starts to freeze because he starts to get up closer and closer to space, and the suit starts to freeze. And it ices over, and he has to plummet back to Earth and, barely survives. And, of course, he's not even too worried about it, but Jarvis was a little bit worried about it. Well, there are some differences in the dialogue between Tony and Jarvis in those sections as well. But that was key foreshadowing that never actually appears in the script again. That was just a scene that happened that Tony was doing, and it never becomes a consequence. But as you know, if you've seen Iron Man, how does Iron Man overcome Obadiah in Obadiah's suit? Well, he takes Obadiah up into the atmosphere, and Obadiah's suit starts to ice over, and now he can't fight Tony anymore. That's not in the script at all. In fact, the way that they overcome Obadiah is that Pepper is working with Tony to create an EMP that puts both of their suits out of working order. It just cancels out both suits, and then Tony is finally able to be next to Obadiah. Now, I should mention too that Obadiah, when that happens, Obadiah is over a big vat of acid or some sort of chemical, and Tony's holding on to him. He's still in the suit. Of course, Obi is really heavy because it's a giant suit. The EMP has already happened, so both of them are like lost all their strength. And then the pieces collapse. Obadiah falls into the acid, and that is how Obadiah actually dies. So different because there's no taking Obadiah into the atmosphere, having his suit freeze over. That does not happen in the script, which is pretty interesting, I thought. And then having Pepper set off the MP, that's pretty interesting. Also, another interesting part about the difference between the film script and the final finished product is that the film script always refers to Obadiah in the giant suit as Dynamo. And of course, I don't think that's ever said anywhere in the actual film. They never refer to Obadiah in the suit as Dynamo. Now, if you're a comic book fan, you may recognize that name from the comic books. I don't know that because I haven't read those comics, but if that's true, then let me know about it in the comments down below, because I'd be really surprised to see who that character was and what that character looked like. Maybe send me a link or something. But there you go. Those are some of the major differences. The other major difference that is really critical when it comes to plotting out the movie on Sid Field's paradigm is when we figure out as the audience that Obadiah truly is the bad guy. So, if you remember in the film, Tony goes out to fight off the remaining 10 Rings forces out in Afghanistan. And that's a really cool scene. Tony flies all the way out there. And then on his way back, he gets in a little scuffle with the Air Force pilots. That scene comes after Obadiah visiting the leadership of the 10 Rings and basically saying that they failed him in trying to kill Tony Stark. So we know as the audience that Obadiah is a bad guy at that point of the film, before Tony goes out and fights off the rest of the 10 Rings forces. In fact, it's kind of interesting because I never thought of this before, but Tony's fighting off the remaining forces who don't have their actual leader anymore because Obadiah wiped those people out, which is kind of interesting. But what the film did, probably in the editing room, is decided that they wanted to reveal Obadiah as the villain a little bit earlier. So Obadiah is revealed to us earlier in the film than in the script, because in the script, Obadiah visits the 10 Rings after Tony has gone out and battled them in that little Afghani city. So the difference is pretty interesting. That scene either comes before or after Tony actually fights off the 10 Rings in that small Afghanistan city. And that changes how it's revealed to Tony and Pepper and how long we have to wait to see that Obadiah is confirmed to be the villain in Pepper's eyes, because when she downloads the data, she finds that information. So that was probably solved in the editing room. They said, we'll let the audience know that Obadiah is bad. They'd been foreshadowing that anyway, so it wasn't like it was a really big surprise. And then Pepper doesn't figure it out till plot point 2, which happens after Tony has gone over to fight in Afghanistan and had the scuffle with the pilots. Pretty interesting stuff, and has a big impact over the structure of the story. And now the structure matches Sid Field's paradigm even better because of what they did in the editing room. I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out the rest of the videos in my MCU playlist. And if you wouldn't mind, support me on Patreon, patreon.com/howstorieswork. You get content like this earlier than you would get it on the MCU playlist because I put it out there first. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next show.